Hello everyone, Angel here, and today I'm going to bring you my final review of Star Trek DS9 Harbinger. So much like Star Trek TNG of Final Unity, I'm going to try and freeform this. I've got some notes in front of me, and I'm just going to go through this and give you my general thoughts about this not very good game. Possibly even terrible game. Is it terrible? Yeah, I'm bordering that it's a terrible game. Now, Star Trek games historically are generally middling to bad, with a small handful of exceptions. You can see my discussion with Lorne about our top 5 Trek games for something a bit more specific about that. But coming off the back of playing TNG of Final Unity, this game is really bad by comparison. I really enjoyed a Final Unity despite its quirks and flaws. This does not have a lot going for it. I think I'm just going to list the pros immediately because it's going to be a very short conversation. So basically the main pro of this game is the voice acting. It's very good all round. The main cast are clearly giving their A game, particularly Renee Auberjonois and Armin Shimmerman as Quark and Odo, or Odo and Quark respectively. And the side characters are also pretty decent. I think the only character I didn't really care for or had any thoughts about was Vedic Rasmus, I think, the Bajoran character. She didn't seem to have any purpose being there except to maybe be a murder suspect and give us some kind of religious lore about the coming Harbinger. Other than that, she served no purpose in the game. But other than that, Johnny Tharon, the Scythians, there's the security officer who's guarding the Scythians, Desma Yarrow, and there's a background character here a couple of times who's you'd never see him, but he's clearly one of the engineers still on the station. So yeah, all great there. Visually speaking, some of the DS9 stuff is really well done. I mean, it's clearly a lot of pre-rendered stuff here. DS9 itself is really well detailed. They've clearly gone to a lot of attention to detail in recreating the station. As far as the Scythian stuff goes, towards the end of the game, some of it's okay. I think they did a reasonable job trying to make it look alien and different, with one major exception, and we will get to that, trust me. Maze. But otherwise, it was fine. No problem with that. However, well, I guess we'll get to that. But that pretty much ends my pros. Can I think of anything else? Well, I suppose the last 2 hours of the game I did enjoy, for the most part. But again, we'll get to that. But otherwise, that's it. I don't have anything else praiseworthy for this game. So, where do we start? Well, let's talk about the plot first. The plot's okay. It's not a bad plot. I mean, it starts off basically being a murder mystery plot, and then in the background you've got the menace of the automated drones which are threatening the station. And once the murder mystery plot's out the way, you deal with drones and go to the source, the point of origin, and you deal with them. I generally don't have much of a problem with that concept. However, the problem I do have with it is that this is not a DS9 plot, or at least it should not be a DS9 plot. This is a TNG or Voyager plot, or even Enterprise. In fact, this plot has kind of already been done by Star Trek. In the first season of The Next Generation, there's the Arsenal of Freedom, which is one of the better episodes of Season 1, if I'm honest, in fact one of my favourites. And the Enterprise comes along a planet which has no life, and it's discovered that it was basically a planet of weapons dealers, and they created this technology which essentially wiped them all out because it was too good. And these drones that come along and fire at you will learn the behaviour and then come back with an upgraded version which is harder to fight and has a shield, and they kind of look like sex toys, if I'm honest. And eventually they are defeated by Picard talking to a hologram of the AI computer and essentially kind of outsmarting it. You know, typical Star Trek trope. The strength of Deep Space Nine is where it's situated. It's a very politically driven show, dealing with the Bajorans, the Cardassians, then later the Dominion, and all the various kind of political ongoings of the Alpha, Beta quadrants, and Gamma quadrant, I suppose, when you include the Dominion. DS9 did do kind of Voyager TNG style plots, particularly in its earlier seasons, but they didn't really work well for DS9 in my opinion. So yeah, aside from the political intrigue, obviously the other strength of DS9 is its characters. It's ensemble cast of characters, and that's really Deep Space Nine's strength in my opinion. So yeah, this plot, it shouldn't be in this game. This game should have dealt with something to do with the Bajorans, the Cardassians, the Dominion, or something within that structure. It would have just been so much more interesting to be dealing with that rather than what we got. And what we got, as I said, it's fine, but I just wasn't that invested in it in the setting that I was located in, given what I just described, why I like DS9. The timeline of this plot is basically set between the end of Season 3 and the beginning of Season 4 DS9, so before the Klingons attack Cardassia, and just after basically the Founders give their ominous warning that we're already everywhere, just after Odo kills one of his own. That would have been a perfect kind of sort of point to make a bridging episode here, where we could have taken the elements of what happened at the end of Season 3 DS9, dealing with the shapeshifters or something to do with the Dominion, and then kind of rumblings of the Klingons being up to something before leading up to Way of the Warrior. That would have been pretty cool. And in the middle, obviously, you've also, at this point, the Cardassians are obviously having their own internal revolution since the destruction of the Obsidian Order in their failed attack with the Romulans on the Founders' homeworld. There's loads of stuff here you could have done which would have bridged the show more directly, but they didn't do it, for whatever reason. So, with the plot itself, I'll go through the murder mystery and then the Scythian stuff. I mean, they're kind of intertwined, but the murder mystery stuff tends to basically dominate the first half of the game. It's okay. The big problem with this game is that there's very little for the player to actually do. You walk about, you talk to people, and that's it. There's almost a complete lack of puzzles or something to challenge the mind or be interesting as part of this plot. You're just basically going through the motions, talking to people, you go through some dialogue trees. It's very hard to screw up. The game almost doesn't let you screw up, I think, for the most part. And eventually you just put two and two together with very little interaction on your own part. You maybe go through 2 or 3 puzzles until the end of the murder mystery, and then it kind of culminates in this corridor walking phaser shootout. I say phaser shootout, it's barely that. So you basically have a little ticking because you pick up this alien technology, which allows you to find some cloaked figures who are basically trying to steal all the technology that the ambassador Carrick had brought back from his meeting with the Scythians. And that's it. And then with that out the way, it's full on into the drone plots. Now the drone plot kind of sits in the background the entire time. It's obviously the very opening sequence of the game where you're attacked by them, you crash, you have your first puzzle for like the first hour or so before the next one hits, and then you're immediately put into a combat situation, which brings me to my first hatred of this game. Real pet peeve of the game, the combat. The ship combat is terrible. I mean, Star Trek doesn't have a particularly good record of starship combat around this era until sort of Starfleet Academy, Klingon Academy, and Bridge Commander, but this by far is the worst. The hit registration is god-awful. You try and click on the drones you're trying to kill, and half the time you're not hitting them. It's absolutely impossible to complete this on hard difficulty. I say impossible, it's impossible for me. You just die straight away, and so I had to switch this to easy difficulty. And as far as difficulty goes, that's kind of all the difficulty really affects, is the combat, as far as I'm aware. And then you have to go through this kind of combat sequence maybe half a dozen times, and there's a couple of optional ones in the holosuites as well, which I did not do in this playthrough. It does get irritating towards the end of the game when you get constantly attacked by drones, because you have to be pretty quick, otherwise they instantly kill you. It's a similar kind of combat as I just mentioned before. When you're walking down the corridor, you just click and hit something, but this part at least is much easier because there's not so many things on the screen you're trying to shoot. But aside from that annoyance, it's not as bad as the starship combat. I guess there's kind of an element of the Borg here in that each version of the drone updates and adapts itself to your weapon, so eventually it's impossible to kill them. But other than that, they're fine as a concept, and I didn't have too much of an issue with the drone plot either. However, as far as both of these plots go, where sometimes the game falls down a little in the dialogue, is that the dialogue repeats itself, or there's a repetition sometimes of stuff you are already aware of, or the other characters are already aware of that you've spoken about, but then they go back to you asking questions about it as if you haven't answered the question or asked the question already. So I think there's a little bit, the dialogue trees are a little messy, or there's not a great deal of consistency in some cases when you're trying to sort of find information or trigger the next sequence of events. It didn't happen all the time, it's just something I noticed from time to time. That said, the last section of the game, that last hour and a half, to an hour is by far the best part of this game. And that's basically once you reach the AI computer running the whole show. And there's 3 of them actually. You've got the ship builder, you've got the master control program, and then you've got the tactical program, or holo programs. This was a lot more fun than pretty much the entire rest of the game put together. The voice acting on all 3 is great, particularly Keel, the shipbuilder. He was just gold in most of his scenes. It did start to get a little repetitive towards the end, but I really enjoyed his character, particularly when he gives you an annoyance rating. Very well done there. And it actually felt like a dialogue boss, if you don't understand what I mean by that, in that you have to really figure out what dialogue choices you have to make, because if you make the wrong ones, you die. So there was actually some degree of thought in what you have to say here and how you have to do it. Another issue I have is that there are a lot of inconsistencies on this side of the plot, particularly once you've arrived, because Quark is there. He's stowed a ride aboard the Hudson, I think it was, along with the Scythian ship, and he somehow got ahead of you and managed to get all this stuff and figured things out while you were busy fucking around with the maze and doing other things with the power generators, which I'm going to get to in a second. But yeah, there's a lot of plot inconsistencies there that did not make sense, and I went into this in the video as well. Some of the gameplay elements leading up to that, though, are bad. Very bad. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the maze. The fucking maze. Anyone who's played this game is universally, as far as I've seen, hates this section. And if you watch my playthrough, you'll understand why. This maze is terribly designed. It's really long. You have to do a lot of backtracking. It doesn't make any logical sense as to why it's there. And the game gives you pretty much no direction of where you're supposed to go. Because you have to activate the control center, but you also have to activate these power generators in the correct order, and then press a bunch of buttons. And at no point does the game really help you or tell you how you're supposed to do this and what correct order you're supposed to do this. And the feedback it gives you, if you've done it right or done it wrong, is confusing. It's not clear whether you've either done it right or you've done it wrong. And that's bad game design. I mean, if there's one thing that they could have done, which would make the maze section at least better or more interesting, is as you move forward and activate the power generators, that the colours of the maze sections you're walking on change. So you kind of map where you're going, or it's clear what path you need to take or what path you have already taken. And that would have made it a lot easier to deal with that section and also do any backtracking if you needed to do it. But yeah, they didn't. I mean, it's not like the visual sections had a lot going for them. They don't really update very much anyway. And I suppose this kind of brings me to the visual design. As I said, the DS9 stuff is great, the Scythian stuff is not so great, but to get more involved into this subject, it's... I guess the developers were kind of wanting to do this kind of 3D version, make it was that kind of transition point in time where 3D models were starting to be a real thing in gaming. Basic, but it was there. But this was the wrong time to do it for this kind of game. It really limits you in what you can do because the technology just isn't there to do it. One of the big issues with this game is that it just feels dead. It's empty. Now, in story-wise, they kind of wave this away by saying, oh, there's a plasma storm, so, that's why the station is pretty much dead. It's evacuated, of course, and the Scythian, well, it's an automated place. There's no people running it. So that explains it in lore, but it just makes the game feel so dead and empty. And the audio design that goes with it is middling at best, but many rooms just have the same droning sound. Not too intrusive, but it's just the same over and over again. I mean, with the DS9, it's just the same background hum of the station. At least Ops has the usual kind of beeping and better noise design, but some of the Scythian rooms were bad, almost piercingly bad, and there's no music at all. Except in the opening and ending sequences. Actually, no, not even the ending sequence. When I finished the game, there was no music playing at the end sequence. Nothing at all. So the only music was the intro and the DS9 credits at the start. That was it. No music. I mean, even Final Unity had music. Not very much of it, but it did have music every time you beam down to a planet, so you'd get the music. But also Final Unity had much better audio design. It would be different sounds here and there. You had the background ambience, then you had maybe some birds in the background, or some computers, or water, something. There's something going on there, with one or two exceptions being particularly bad. But yeah, this has nothing going for it. And then when you're dealing with the actual characters themselves, the character models, they've aged pretty badly. They don't look good in certain angles, particularly Cisco with his hand, as if, because he was holding a phaser and then he's not, and then they just keep using this model for a good portion of the game. There's not much in the way of idle animations. They do this in Ops. There's actually quite a fair bit of idle animations for Kira and Dax as they're kind of working their computers, but everyone else is just standing there, static, not moving. It's distracting. I don't like it. I mean, this is again where a Final Unity and its predecessor's 25th anniversary shine, because the characters are always doing their little ticks, or, you know, scanning a tricorder, looking with a phaser, pulling their uniforms, and things are moving, things are dynamic, and it's a lot more interesting to look at, and frankly the art styles of those games are better as well. The only other issue I had with the audio design is that although the voice acting is great, there was some occasional inconsistencies in the volumes of the. Sometimes you'd hear very quiet, and then suddenly there'd be a very loud voice. So maybe that some re-records or some balancing wasn't done there. It doesn't happen very often, but I did notice it from time to time. I do kind of like the Scythians themselves and the way they're presented. They remind me, of course, of that famous episode Darmok, you know. Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, Shaka, the walls fell, all that jazz, where they speak in metaphor. Here, it's not speaking in metaphor, it's just economy of language, so they speak in 1, 2, or 3 words at most. It has logical issues of how a society could develop this way, but at least in this case, when we see the AI programs who are speaking normally, that they used to be like this, and I wonder perhaps if the society developed or devolved their language in a way to be more concise and direct with the use of words, so that there's, you know, it didn't happen again. I don't know. There could be some logical loopholes there, but the presentation is fine, if a little repetitive from time to time. It's just a shame the game doesn't really use it very well in terms of how you're supposed to investigate. You just basically pick your dialogue options and eventually you'll just pick the right one. So yeah, I suppose the only thing I want to comment on, the player yourself, you are basically a made-up race called the Tyrians, who are never seen or heard from again, to basically explain your presence there, what you're doing, and I just felt, why does it have to be a race we've never heard of? Why not just be a human? The game makes a big point of saying how this race isn't known for their combat or tactical prowesses, they're diplomats, but I didn't see this as necessary. I mean, Carrick could have been any Federation-based race we're familiar with, like it could have been a Vulcan, an Andorian, or something we already know, and that you're just an adjutant, a regular human adjutant who has to learn how to handle himself when shit hits the fan. Almost a bit like Gordon Freeman in a way, I suppose. You know, just your guy doing his job. You know, you weren't trained in combat, but suddenly you're thrown into this situation where you have to learn how to fight with a phaser and do some investigations. But instead we're just showing how this character, oh yes, I have a tactical rating of 4, and did I mention I've been doing some investigative work, as if to justify why he should be helping Odo with the in murder investigation or helping in the tactical combat side of things. I mean, it's not like they have a lot of personnel to begin with and they need all hands, you know. I mean, even Odo deputised Quark in one episode when everyone else was incapacitated. So Odo's not above working with someone when the situation requires it. And I think that pretty much covers it. I was looking at the designer of this game, so Stormfront Studios made this game, and looking at the list of games they've made, it's predominantly sports-based, a lot of baseball, NASCAR, that sort of stuff, and in between that all, there's DS9 Harbinger, so it's actually kind of puzzling to me why this studio decided to take on the challenge of making a Star Trek adventure game when their main experience appears to be sports-based games. It's not entirely sports-based games, but that seems to be the vast majority of their catalogue. The company itself shut down in 2008 due to adverse business conditions, and that's all I've got. There is unfortunately next to no information about the development of this game, which is kind of typical for this kind of era. Unlike a Final Unity, I didn't try to reach out to any of the developers this time. So unfortunately, we're probably not ever going to know what happened during the development of this game, why it turned out the way it did, because I have to wonder if they were just limited by technology, money, time, or just a combination of all three, that the game ended up in the state that it is. So, yeah. Would I recommend this game? No, not really. If you are a Star Trek DS9 fan, then you can give it a go. I mean, you'd be better off just watching a playthrough of it, someone without commentary, so don't watch mine if you want commentary. If you don't want commentary, rather. There are long plays where someone just plays it for the entire game and doesn't say anything. You're just better off doing that than playing the game itself, and then you'll get what you need out of it. As far as that goes, then it can sort of classify as an episode of DS9, because you do get, as I said, great voice acting, and there is a plot here, and that's fine. But it's not a game I can recommend, and to anyone who's not a DS9 fan, no, there is nothing redeeming about this game to a non-Star Trek fan, in my opinion. Unlike a Final Unity, which was a passable adventure game for a non-Star Trek fan, whereas it'd be a great one for a Star Trek fan, then this one is kind of the opposite way around. So, yeah. Terrible game. Wasn't a lot of fun to play it. I'm glad some of you had fun watching me play it, but I do not recommend this game. So I'm going to cut it off there. If you have suggestions of what you might like me see me tackle next, let me know in the comments. I do have some ideas, but time permitting, I don't know when I'm next going to get to that, aside from just real life being super busy, and of course all my stuff with TFTC. I don't have a lot of time to do this kind of thing. It's more like a little side project I do every now and then. Do let me know in the comments, and until next time, do take care.